And I'm going to ask Jeff Gabriel if you had anything you wanted to say before we get started.
No, except to say that we'd like to have these meetings even more frequently than we are having them. And if anybody has any program ideas or presenter ideas, or they'd like to present, I'd certainly appreciate if they'd contact me. I'll post my email address in the chat feature now, so if anybody wanted to contact me, they would have my email address. Thank you. Thank you for coming.
Yes, I'd like to say thank everybody for joining up tonight. If may I just ask, are there any other general questions before we get into the program? Okay. Sounds good. All right, so I'm going to introduce our speaker tonight. It's Dan McFadden. Dan grew up in, right, is somebody trying to talk? All right, I'll try it again. So Dan's originally from Brooklyn and now lives in Mountain Lakes, New Jersey. He majored in physics in college. Most of his career was spent in brokerage and financial firms in New York City, working on software. He has a daughter and 3 sons and is now retired. He commuted to New York for 36 years by train, mostly. In addition to being an avid rail fan and photographer, really interested in the Erie Lackawanna, Dan also plays platform tennis and pickleball. Dan, take it away.
Okay. Now, let me, I've already shared screen, right? I don't have to worry about that, right? Well, if anything's wrong here, you can tell me. Okay.
I'm not seeing it yet, though.
Okay, 1 second. That's the wrong one. Okay, here we go. Okay. I was originally asked to present the same program that I presented to Tri-State, but I started to make changes, and I can never leave well enough alone. So some changes were made here, and this is almost exclusively New Jersey. Anything that was non-New Jersey was pretty much taken out.
Still not seeing anything, Dan.
You're not seeing anything?
No.
Okay. So I'm going to collapse that. Now, if I go up here, if I say share screen?
Yep.
It says host disabled attendee screen sharing.
You should try it one more time now.
Okay.
Hey, Rich, I believe the meeting host has to allow the share.
Yeah.
And I just did.
Okay, let's try this again.
There you go.
Now I got something else about Zoom here.
That's Randy Brown's screen we're seeing. So Randy Brown has to stop sharing. Randy Brown, you are sharing your screen. Can you stop sharing? Okay, try now.
Okay. Share screen. Desktop. Now let's go back to the whoops. Let me start this again. Hold on. Why didn't that work? One more time here. Okay. Okay. So we're talking about memories of the Lackawanna, Erie Lackawanna in New Jersey. And I'll start by saying that, well, let's go here. I want to first thank some other people whose work has been used here. Ralph Curcia was a big Traction fan, so he when I met him, he took an interest in Erie Lackawanna just before Erie Lackawanna went away. But he was a prolific photographer, and all of his work came to me. And Bob Duthie was my first railfan friend. He grew up next to me in Brooklyn, and you know, it's that enthusiasm of having a friend who has the same interest that really carries you along. And you'll see a lot of his photography here. George Mclean was a character that hung out in the Danville Tower a lot. He lived close enough by the station that if something was happening, he would just walk up to the station in a snowstorm. It made no difference. He somehow was there when things were happening. George Goodwin is my cousin. He's on the meeting here now. He's from, and he and I have been on quite a number of trips, and I'm about 10 years older. So when he was a teen, I was taking him around to see all the sights. He did some photography while I was just watching, so I asked him for some shots as well. And Dave Frainer is another old friend. Dave Frainer also hung out at Denville a lot, spent a lot of time in the tower in Denville, and known Dave Frainer for a long time. So to prove my bona fides, here's a letter to me from the president of the Lackawanna Railroad. 1951, so I'm 9 years old. And apparently I had written a letter to the president complaining about them phasing out the steam locomotives. And so I sent him this letter, and within 3 days, he sent me back a reply. And he said, if you just look at the end, there must be progress. If we stand still, the parade passes us by. Remember that because you will find it to be true later. And it's on the Bicentennial stationery, no less. So, and he also enclosed a booklet that I'm sure many of you have seen, many of you have. So the way I started this little show up is I'm talking about Denville first, because I spent so much time at Denville. All the rest of the time I spent on the railroad probably did not equal the time I spent at Denville. Denville was a great place to hang out. There was a friendly towerman. So if you were hanging out there at night, if something was coming, you knew enough to stay and see it. That happened on any number of occasions. And I can't tell you that in my college days, I spent far too much time hanging out in Denville. And in the wintertime, when it's cold out, you need a place to hang out, and the Denville Tower was it. So, as I said, much of my early rail fanning was with Robert Duthie, who was just a year or two younger than I was. Bob had a camera that shot 35 millimeter film, but the camera, it was shot half frames. So it was better than what I was shooting with. I was shooting with a Brownie for far too long. So you're going to see a number of these half frame pictures from Robert Duthie. And this is a Denville shot. It's by looking at the sun, we can tell it's train number 5, which passed through Denville around 5:30, so heading west. And typically we would stand side by side as teenagers and basically tend to take the same shot. So here's my shot at Denville of the Phoebe snow coming up. And there's Robert Duthie's shot of the same train a split second later. And there's the going away shot that Bob took. This is a picture I took. I was there by myself. You see my shadow there. This is the Lakeland Express. The Lakeland Express was, you could think of that as the premier commuter train on the Boonton line, at least. In those days, it was first stop Boonton. It was quite a train. It also had the Mountain Lake subscription car on the end. So it typically ran. This is an interesting shot. In the summertime, many times you would see freight units, not many times, but often you would see freight units on the passenger trains, there being no need for any steam heating. So here we see a passenger F and then a freight F behind it. And then there was a lot more than, there was a lot of life at Denville. I guess you could say the same about a lot of stations, but here's a late night MU train and they're dropping the papers off. This is a George Mclean photo. As I said, George Mclean was a rail fan that lived close enough by that he could get up there at a moment's notice if he heard something was happening. He was an interesting guy. He came from Carbondale. He had actually been a miner as a young man and was very happy to relocate to Morris County. Another Bob Duthie shot, Phoebe Snow coming east. It's just come by Essling Lake, slowing down for the crossover at Denville. And this particular night, it had an office car. Just including this because I always felt of Denville as a place that didn't change much over the years. This is, to me, this is pretty much a scene that happened right after the electrification. And if you, the one thing was different is there was a little flower garden in the center of the parking lot. Parking lot was very rustic. It was very rustic even when I showed up, just really old gravel. If you look at these little bushes along the platform at the lower right, this I'm assuming is 1932, something like that. 30 years later, the bushes were still there, just not as well taken care of because the Lackawanna didn't have the money for that kind of work anymore. Freight train coming through with an FT. My favorite locomotive is the Trainmasters. This is on a morning train, HB9. My recollection is that you would see the Trainmasters on certain trains more than others. So HB9 was one you would see them. BH8 coming east was another one. I never remember seeing them on HB3. So I'm not too sure why there was a preference for certain trains, but there certainly was for Trainmasters on HB9 and going west. This is the last train down in the morning, the last commuter train in the morning. It would leave Denville around 9 o'clock or so, and that was it for service. So the Boonton line at that time had very limited service, just as it has now. It was primarily a rush hour line. It was interesting how this equipment, this set of equipment was the first train down in the morning. And that train would turn around. We're going to see a picture of it later. This train would turn around and come right back up to Morris and Essex as a deadhead. And then he would proceed onto the main line here, back down to the Y, turn around on the Y, and then go east again as a second time as the last train down. So this set of equipment was the first train down and the last train down. Denville Tower as it stood around 1959 or so. There was a famous mulberry tree, not famous, but there was a mulberry tree just near the tower. It was, kids used to climb in it, and it was just a nice setting. This was a cold November afternoon. For some reason, I went up, even though it was kind of a rainy day. And this is Lackawanna's version of weed whacking, as far as I can tell. I don't know what else they might be doing. So this is in Lackawanna days, November of 59. Boot and drill the same day. This would come down around 11:30 in the morning. And of course, the primary customer was Drew Chemical. This is the Phoebe Snow coming east to Denville and Lackawanna days. The milk cars, I don't think, when I looked at this photo, I see milk cars there. I don't think this was a regular thing. Something happened that milk cars were on the Phoebe Snow this particular day. I'm not sure what that was all about, but that was not a regular thing as far as I know. An MU, this MU is that combine there is actually an RPO. If you were to look at the schedule, the RPO service lasted until 64 or so. If you were to look at the schedule and see a local train that took 10 minutes longer, 10 or 12 minutes longer than the other trains, that would be an RPO run. I wish I had I have a few shots of the RPO operations, but not nearly enough. This is the Branchville train. This train, I might be 10:15. This train will go to Netcong, and it'll sit on the Sussex line right by the Netcong station until the Lakeland Express comes in. And then anybody who wanted to go up the Branchville line would get off the Lakeland Express and walk down the stairway and get on this train to Branchville. I suppose there were, few passengers to Newton. And this set of equipment, when it got to Branchville, it would come back as basically a deadhead train, but not a deadhead train. It would pick up the milk cars and bring the loads back down. So, but it would be train 1042, and it would not be carrying passengers. So I only got to spend one July 4th weekend at Denville, but it's illustrative of how interesting the railroad was. There was a lot of variety. So, for example, the eastbound Phoebe Snow came with the first line there has 2 E8s and it is spliced by a B unit. Notice also, if you look at, there's a westbound passenger extra, just 1 minute from off of that. And then looking down, we see train number 5. So the passenger extra is a train running ahead of number 5. I don't know why they would have a passenger extra instead of a second section of number 5. They would do it both ways. But the passenger extra was carrying the white flags, and that's what it was. And the passenger extra, interestingly enough, was carrying some foreign equipment. It had a Wabash coach, a B&O, and a Penske coach. And I'm going to flip ahead one page here. If you look at the engines 814 and 816, those same engines are coming back on train 44 at 6 hours later, and they're also carrying those same foreign coaches along now with the Seaboard coach. What else do we have here? We also have an advanced Phoebe Snow numbers with the 3 F units. We see the regular section of the Phoebe Snow with the 820 and the 811 about 10 minutes later. What else do we have here? We have halfway down, we see BH8, 3 train masters and 90 cars. Down at the bottom of the page, we see a second BH8, this one powered by 4 F units. It also coincidentally has 90 cars. One other thing to notice here is that came to my attention just accidentally by taking notes very carefully. Notice I have a note on the right hand side here, power from number 6. So number 6, 4th line from the top, went down with the 820 and the 811. That equipment was coming back within 3 hours. Those engines were coming back. The turnaround time on the eastern end, when it was the Lackawanna, was really pretty impressive considering what has to be done when a train gets to Hoboken. You know, you have to uncouple, the train has to be pulled back, but typically those units were back within 3 hours. We'll see, we'll see more of that in a second. Well, in fact, over here, I made a mistake. I went to Monday, July 4th. The continuation of July 1st, well, it doesn't make too much difference. So basically, as you can see here, I was sort of enraptured with the railroad. I spent a lot, I was there, you know, on the Friday, then I'm there on July 4th. I spent a lot of time at the station. And here is the turnaround time. If the train went to schedule, I assume they usually would get to Hoboken a few minutes early. But if you would look at the power on the eastbound New Yorker, train number 8, which was scheduled to arrive at 8:45, you would see it coming back in the Phoebe Snow. A turnaround time of just 1 hour and 50 minutes. From number 2 to number 5, just 2 hours and 10 minutes, and from number 6 to number 7, just 1 hour and 25. And that was done almost without exception. And the short time of 1 hour and 25 might indicate why I noticed the number 7 was late. Not too late, but a little bit late quite frequently. Okay, here we have the Tower of Denville, where I spent a lot of nice evenings. We see the schematic up top. Going to the right, we're looking toward Dover. Going to the left, we're looking toward Boonton. The trackage center below is the Y, and the trackage center above is the Marson Essex. So here's Jimmy Morris, the towerman, sitting in his chair. The fellow standing is George Mclean. And here's Jimmy talking to somebody on the block line. So there was, let's just move on here. Had to include this shot. This is my mother getting on a Boonton line train. This is a 1964 shot. I wish this was in color. But after the passenger service was merged, you would see a lot of sharing of power from one line to the other. Eastbound Branchville Milk. This would be on a weekend, probably a Sunday afternoon. On weekends, the loaded milk cars went down the Boonton line. On the weekdays, they went down to Morris and Essex. This is a shot from the tower, obviously. The slide, it was marked on the slide, train number 20, which I don't know really much about. Train number 20 was not a regular thing, but I know there was a train 20. This has renumbered Lackawanna F units, the 8414. Looking up to the station, that blue car was my dad's old 52 Plymouth. The next car down is that of the station agent, a man by the name of Van Orden. Van Orden was so dedicated that on his day off, he would come up with his family, walk around the station, check all the doors to make sure everything was as it should be. Also notice that the freight train is coming down the westbound Main. These tracks were reversible, and so this avoided the need for a crossover down at Rainbow Lakes. And it also left the track open for an eastbound MU, I suppose. Another George Mclean shot. I only put this in because this is a freight unit on a Boonton line passenger train. Again, it has to be a summertime shot because you wouldn't do that in the winter. 1965, small changes started to happen. They were working on the parking lot, and part of that whole deal was to take out the mulberry tree, which was kind of a sad thing. It was a nice setup against the tower. And this is something I never saw, another George Mclean shot. By the time I got around there, the train masters were not running in commuter service. It always puzzled me why they bought the most powerful units were ever used in commuter service. But this is something I never saw, but I thought it was an interesting shot to throw in. Another shot from George Mclean, and this one is rather amazing. I wish I had gotten his negatives, but his wife gave me an album, and I guess I should be happy with that. This is a picture of the Phoebe snow in an epic snowstorm in 1961. By this time, I guess it was no longer the Phoebe snow, it was the Erie Lackawanna Limited. But it's coming up in an epic snowstorm. And the surprising thing here is it's about 4 or 5 hours late. It's being pushed by a set of FTs, 4 FTs on acting as pushers on the Phoebe snow. I also saw 4 FTs on a long distance passenger train, but they were on the point. So I just I never saw the Lackawanna or the Erie Lackawanna canceled trains. Come hell or high water, they were running the trains. So the mid 60s, I sort of lost steam in taking pictures, but as I say, I was taking my teenage cousin around, and he had a fairly decent camera. And so we're going to see a few photos from George Goodwin. This is taken around, oh, well, it actually says on the photo, I put it on there, 1964. Boonton line passenger train. 1409 was the old Lackawanna 970. This looks like the P-Burger, we're not sure. And we also are not sure, George and I, whether or not this went down the Morris and Essex or went back up and went down the Boonton line. What I do remember is this train set out a few cars in the box plant, which was adjacent to the interlocking just west of here. And so if he was going to do that, he would have come down to Morris and Essex a little bit to make the set out. But George has movies that are being digitized, so we may find out which way it did go. This is the P-Burger a year later. And I think some of the motivation for somebody else probably knows better than I do, but I think some of the motivation for running the P-Burger this way was to do set outs for the Morristown and Erie without having to run a drill. This is the eastbound Phoebe Snow in 1965. Just a little more than a year later, the Phoebe Snow would be gone. This particular day, he had 3 E8s and an office car. Here we see train number 43 running with a single F unit. This train had been cut back. I don't know how far back, but it was no longer running to Buffalo, that's for sure. And shortly it would be no more. This day it had the single E unit and 4 cars. This is a late afternoon train out of Hoboken. So finally I invested in a good camera, and the impetus was that the High Iron Company was running a 2-day trip to Binghamton and back. So with that in mind, I bought myself a good camera. This is a shot at Denville. On the Tuesday after the fan trip, they were running the engine back to Steamtown on a small freight train. Freight trains. There used to be a lot of freight trains at Denville. As time went on, they became less and they became fewer and fewer. This, I believe, is CS9. You can see it's getting a little trashy around the station. The station is suffering from a lack of maintenance. Had a nice caboose, and it looks like a very, very freshly painted hopper car. And if you look down toward the freight house, you see that things are starting to happening with reducing the trackage around Denville. And this is what was happening in 1971. This is what we would call the High Line going over the duck under was being taken out, and it would just be a single track through the station on the Booten line. Shot of the station at night. Not a great shot, but it shows something else that would have the kind of life that was always around the station. Not every family had 2 cars. Taxis would typically meet the trains, especially the trains coming up from New York. And most of the time they would get a fare. And if the taxi wasn't there, people would be on the payphone to call the taxi to come. Taxi had a pretty good business from Denville Station, especially through the 60s and somewhat into the 70s. Another shot at Denville at night. One last shot. This is looking from across the tracks on the other side of the Marston Essex. To the left there, we can see the power station, and on the far right, we can see there's probably another railfan sitting across on the Booten side. So now we come to the said state of affairs with the signal masts have no signals, and for 50 years that's been depressing me. But the trains were still running. Obviously, we're into Conrail here. So this is about 1977 or so. And here they're a year into the merger. There was still some equipment that had not been relettered, renumbered, or anything else. Such was the case with this Jeep. And they're putting some big piece of equipment into the power station, maybe replacing something, I don't know. Now Conrail is showing its face. This is a train in the 70s. We have a club car on the right. And finally, the day came in 1992 when the station was taken down. People were trying to save it, but it just didn't happen. Okay, I did get around the railroad. I didn't spend all my time at Denville. I got around a bit. And my first fan trip was to Branchville in 1959. It turns out, as it turned out, I didn't know it when I bought the ticket. As it turns out, it was a regularly scheduled train that was run as a railfan trip. And instead of the Booten line coaches, they had the 200 series air-conditioned cars. And they let us off the train straight as well, the shuffling cars around. And we had the 2-hour layover in Denver, which was nice to walk around. They let the people were walking up the engines and looking at them. So there's my friend Bob Duthie from Brooklyn on the left-hand side. We both left Brooklyn at a decent hour. Took the subway, took the Hudson tubes, got over to Hoboken and got on the train. Another trip, the second Erie Lackawanna, the second railfan trip. This one was in Erie Lackawanna. It was an amazing trip because it just took me to places I had never even heard of. It was an amazing trip, 300 miles, and it ran like clockwork. This was the handout, and the handout shows that we start off going up the Erie to Maybrook. At Maybrook, we go back out on the L&H over to Andover Junction. From Andover Junction, we come down the branch to Port Morris. Then we go back out the old road to Washington, up to Mononkechunk and to East Stroudsburg. And then we take a high-speed run over the cutoff and then back over the Booten line, 300 miles. And I have somehow or other, I got the plan for the trip, and this probably was from just hanging out in the tower. I think they got all these this kind of stuff. It was sponsored by the Brantford Trolley Association. Take a look at the crews halfway down there. There were 3 crews involved in this. They said there was an Erie train and engine crew. In other words, they were qualified for the Erie former Erie employees, and they were going to operate the train through the entire trip. From Maybrook to Andover Junction, the LNHR was going to furnish an engineer and conductor pilot, but notice that the Erie crew is still going to operate the train through the entire trip. And finally, when you get to Andover Junction, now it's Lackawanna territory, and we're going to have Lackawanna qualified pilot and conductor. And the way that what they're going to do is that crew apparently is going to get on the Branchville Train 1059, and they're going to deadhead to Andover. So the crew starts in Hoboken, deadheads on a Branchville train to Andover, the regular Sunday milk train, and then they come back on and pilot the train over the rest of the trip from Andover Junction. The other thing of interest is 3/4 of the way down, we talk about a photo run by at Mononkechunk Tunnel. Think about doing something like this today. So they're saying they're going to take this train, which has 12 or 13 cars, and they're going to pull out of the tunnel, 6 head cars to clear the tunnel, unload the trains, back into the tunnel 600 feet, and then proceed west at a slow speed. I have movies being digitized right now that show that, and I'm hoping that they come out okay. Anyway, so this is a very dirty slide, but it does show the first stop at Maybrook. This is taken out. I thought this was taken out a coach window, but maybe not. This is a Robert Duthie shot. Here's a shot at Port Morris from Robert Duthie showing the, I think it was happenstance that the Erie inspection car was there. And you can see the fan trip with the 200 series coaches behind. And my good friend Dave Frainer was out photographing the trip that day. I was on the train, but he was out chasing it. So here we are passing Port Murray. Here's a shot I really like, passing the old Oxford station around that beautiful curve. The theme of the trip, by the way, if you haven't figured it out, the theme of the trip was half Erie and half Lackawanna. And the way they had the train arranged, they had, if you look at it here, you can see behind the baggage car, there's 5 Stillwells, the Phoebe Snow Diner, 5 200 coaches, and then a baggage car at the end. And here's the going away shot at Oxford. Now this slide was marked Buttsville, and I imagine that's routes 46 and 31 out there, but I still cannot orient myself to understand this photo. But the slide was marked Buttsville. I had to get some maps and try to understand it. And here's the photo run by Mononkechunk. This shot appeared on the Erie Lackawanna calendar a few years ago. a much better version of this than this. But nevertheless, look at the close clearance, and they're willing to, let the train creep by. The train was probably running 2 miles an hour or 3 miles an hour, very slowly. 15 years later, I went back to Menocochung and walked through it. Just, tunnels are an interesting. Anyway, I did walk through Menocochung, but, sometime later, obviously closed. It also had a partial collapse when I went through. And now we get to East Stroudsburg, and this is the only pictures I have here that are not in New Jersey. In East Stroudsburg, the engines ran around the train again. So here's Bob Duthie's shot, and here's my shot. It's the same thing. Nice Lackawanna truck off to the left-hand side. Okay, now we're all done with fan trips. Rainy day. This looks like a work train to me at Dover. This is taken February of 1960. So it's a Lackawanna shot. Shortly after that, HB9 came through. 3 Fs. The second 2 Fs are FTs. Picture on the Verona branch. I don't have much original Erie stuff at all, but this is on the Verona. My college roommate lived in Verona. So I went home with him one weekend, and he said, "What do you want to do?" On Saturday morning, he says, "What do you want to do?" I says, "I want to see the station." So luckily enough, the train came by shortly thereafter, and it was quite a little grade there. It was quite a little grade there. You can just see next to the telephone pole the train order board. I think that's for the Verona station. There's quite a little grade there. This train had 29 cars. The engine came back just with the caboose a half hour or 45 minutes later. So I assume the whole shebang, the whole train was for the Morristown and Erie at Roseland, or Essex Fells rather. This is the deadhead train, X105. This is the train I mentioned before, where a set of equipment goes down in the first train in the boot line, then comes deadheads back up. This is train X100. If you look in the employee timetable, you'll see a train X105. This train ran deadhead all the way from Hoboken up to Denville to cover the last boot line train. Here's another deadhead train, X64. X64, the first train up the Boonton line, we go to Dover, and he would back down from Dover around to Wyong and then go down to Marston, Essex. And I think he picked up the empty milk cars and the oranges. Notice the last car is what they called a stove coach, coach 646. Now notice the little stack up toward the front here. So there was a pot-bellied stove in this car. So in the event that they didn't have any passengers and they were just running, it was just a milk run, they could avoid putting the steam heat on and just have the pot-bellied stove going. Here's the exact same place 50 years later. Not quite as much character. Phoebe Snow in Madison, spliced 2E8 spliced by a Jeep. And my assumption is that the Jeep is not on there for power. It's more to get it to Scranton for servicing. Every couple of weeks, this would happen. Convent was a very bucolic place. Another shop at Convent, 2 cars, Sunday local. And this is just before the merger. Lakeland Express laying over in Washington on a weekend. The passenger car is the Mountain Lake subscription car. Port Morris. This was the day that the L&H had their Centennial and they had the 2124 running on it. So on the way back, we made a stop at Port Morris. And so here we see a Jeep, 2 Alcos, a small Fairbanks. And in the distance there off to the left, we see some F units. And I guess this is the piggyback ramp here, sort of a primitive piggyback facility at Port Morris. Port Morris. And this is a George Mclean photo. I threw this in because it was in fact taken at Port Morris, and the small Fairbanks were always running the Bangor in Portland. They're pretty much dedicated up there, and they were known. Those crews are known to keep them super clean. And looking at this shot, I tend to think that's corroborated. Okay, now we're getting close to the merger. Summer of 1960. In the summer of 1960, the Lackawanna did a lot of work in the eastbound main between Morristown and Madison. So there was quite a few days where they had single tracking. So this is the Tampa, or I guess it's the Tampa in Madison. And here's the eastbound Pocono Express, train number 2, wrong railing it, coming through Madison. And here's the same train number two again at Convent on the Friday before the merger. The track crews are out and work was ongoing. So just before this whole business of state involvement, state picking up the cost of, helping the railroads to provide this service, this goes way, way back. I was actually commuting on the railroad that summer because I had a summer job at Drew University. So I would take the train I didn't have my license yet, and I would take the train from Morris Plains to Madison. And this was on the seat one day. So this problem's been this problem existed a long time before we got the agencies that we know now. So of course I had to go see the first EL train, or at least I get a shot on the first day. I don't know what I was expecting, but nothing was different, nothing at all. And in fact, for the first 6 or 7 months, the only thing that changed on the Lackawanna was an MU car or two was led at Erie Lackawanna, and eventually all the units were renumbered. Some of them were lettered for Erie Lackawanna, but basically the equipment itself, nothing changed for the first 6 or 7 months. I think it was something to do with union disputes, not sure. So in Thanksgiving weekend, I got to Hoboken in 1960, and here we see a set of F units that have been renumbered. The same day, a drill coming into West End Junction. Here's an Alco unit that had not been renumbered. So it didn't all happen in one day, but this is around the time it was happening. A couple of weeks into the merger, everything got renumbered. On this particular day, my friend and I, Bob Duthie, had the bright idea to walk out to Croxton Yard. So we got a few pictures of the Erie switchers. But this is what we were after. I had heard that the O&W had a set 3 different sets of A, B, BBA, Fs, FT units, and they were there, and the trustees of the O&W had hopes of selling them, which I understand they never did. So there were 3 sets of Fs and a heater car. And that's my friend Bob Duthie up in the cab. Shot on the Gladstone line, probably around 61. This is a little puzzling to me. I noticed this in more recent times. It looks to me like they had some sort of package business that was that the Lackawanna was involved with. I don't know any details, but it sort of has that look. This was for the filming of a movie. The Black River and Western equipment was taken from, I think this equipment had been stored in Chester or Long Valley, someplace like, anyway, it was brought to Lake Junction, sat there for a few days. And then from Lake Junction, it was taken down in the P&D drill and it went out to Gladstone because they were doing a film. I think the film was From the Terrace. I was curious enough that I eventually got the movie. It was not very good, but I think Paul Newman was in that thing, so it was not a minor deal. Early in the merger, we see train 47 at Dover. Again, the big change for passenger service came on April the 30th of 61. Again, all these units are Lackawanna units. Nothing has changed. We see Erie Lackawanna lettering has been added and the herald on the nose of the engine, but still it's all Lackawanna equipment. Lake Junction, probably in 61 or so. Not a great shot, but it's something of interest here. We have two sets of FTs on this train. This is a Saturday morning. I'm hanging out at Lake Junction because I got very interested in the C&J Baldwins. So we have two sets of FTs here, and on weekends there was always some sort of power imbalance because the tonnage was primarily east. So on weekends you would see power heading west one way or another. On one particular occasion, I saw three sets of ABBAs running just with a caboose, a light engine move. Here what we're seeing here on this particular day is we're seeing I don't think this was needed for the power. I think it was just a matter of getting power back west. This was in 1961. Whoops. Phoebe Snow at Chester Junction, early 60s. HB9 with 3 train masters at Mount Arlington. Stopping by Port Morris, I saw this steam crane was all fired up and ready for some trouble of some sort or other. Old Road Drill at Madison. I went to Drew University, so this is all part of my college education. With a wooden caboose. And this is when I became aware that the RPO service was going to end, I belatedly took a few shots. I wish I had taken a lot more. It's kind of interesting. The trucks pulling up, and this is the evening train. It's Erie Lackawanna, so I guess it's train 43. I saw the mail hook used once early on before I had a license. I rode a bike to Morristown. I was checking out the Morristown in their yard, and I saw that there was a mail sack on this rack here. And sure enough, the Phoebe Snow came along, slowed down to a certain extent, and picked up mail on the fly. Eastbound Phoebe Snow that same day at Morristown. Set of FTs taking freight into Hoboken through the Bergen tunnels. Set of train masters doing the same thing. And an engine on the Y at West End. So remember, we're doing this in two parts. First, we're going through. I went through chronologically through Denville. Now I'm going chronologically through the rest of the railroad, so to speak. Finally, I got, as I said before, I finally got a good camera. This was shot number 1 of roll number 1 in Hoboken. The first slide photo I ever took of thousands. Here we are at Port Morris, that same, the high iron trip returning on a freight train to Steamtown. This is the joint operation with the C&J. I guess this was SE98 or something like that. This is at Haynesburg on the cutoff, or Paulin's Kill, whatever you want to call it. 4-track main at Ramsey with a freight train coming down. And the Reading engine that impersonated a D&H engine was brought down to Hoboken for a fan trip, and it came down and sat in the freight yards for a while. This is, I think, 1972 or 3. You see the World Trade Center is not quite finished on the right-hand side. Convent Station. I had meant to put another shot of Convent Station today because it's filled with signage of various kinds. Do this, do that, don't do that, and they've sort of ruined it. Another freight train at Waldwick with a bay window caboose. This shot is at Bound Brook of all places. One of my early jobs, I was working in South Plainfield, and I could look out my office window and see the Port Reading branch just up the road. So one day, I heard something on the railroad and it turned out to be a Sperry car. So I grabbed my camera and told them I'm out of here for the rest of the day. And I chased the Sperry car up to Bound Brook from South Plainfield. And when I got to South Plainfield, this was the scene. I can't tell you exactly what it was all about. I showed this once before, and Bill Shepard knew exactly what it was about. So maybe we'll ask Bill Shepard again to explain it, this time in print. Tugs at Hoboken. They always look spiffy. I wish I had taken a few more shots of those. Freight train at Great Notch. This train obviously was in trouble. See fire coming out of the stack. And they shut it down. Now, sometimes they ran pushes straight through from wherever. I don't know if these came from another train or whatever. Nevertheless, the train got underway and there were pushers helping the train along. Other things happened on the railroad in 1974-5. They had Ridgewood Railroad Days. It was the 100th anniversary of the town of Ridgewood. And they brought the 148 from Whippany and they ran trains back and forth to Hohokus. And I think this could have been the very last use of these Stillwell cars. I think they had already been out of service for a bit when this happened. So here is the train backing down at Hohokus. And here it is coming back, roaring through, heading west. No, this is Hohokus. The train's going to go, the train was shuttling between Ridgewood and Waldwick. And here he is coming through Hohokus. A lot of people turned out. So just shortly before Conrail took over, I was trying to get as many shots as I could. And I went with my friend Ralph Curcio, and we within an hour, we saw two humongous freights at Dover. So it was hard to imagine the railroad being bankrupt or, not doing well or whatever. We see two big freight trains within an hour. This guy had 106 cars. And the next guy had 131 cars with pushers. This is a Ralph Curcio shot of a tug. So once Conrail took over, I and I'm sure every other rail fan was on the lookout to try and get something that still impersonated the Erie Lackawanna. And one day I ran into CS9 that had 2 units that had not been touched. This was in July of the year. The merger, they had already been merged for about 3 months. This was CS9, and the two units had cut off the train, and they were going to go up to the yard and pick up a third unit. So here he is going up to the Dover yard, and here he is coming back with a third unit. I don't know why I threw this in. This is a picture of the Chester branch, what things looked like on the Chester branch just after the merger. So the rumors were flying about the cutoff. Everybody knew that Conrail was cutting back severely. I went up with my cousin George, who is on this call right now, and his brother, and we went up to Hansburg, waited a long time to see a single freight. The Freedom train made a stop in Morris Plains. And they got this engine into the Morristown yard for some work. I think this had to have been the biggest engine ever to have been in the Morristown yard. I can't imagine anything bigger having been down there. Still looking for trains in the cutoff. I went up to Greendale, and I made the company of these little kids you see on the right. Hung out there for hours and hours. But there was something of interest while I was waiting. There were some box cars there. This is February. It was a very mild February day. And they were taking, I guess these are sacks of feed or sacks of something out of these box cars. Interestingly enough, the Towerman at Denville said his first job on the railroad had been in the Greendale Tower. And he also talked about there being a water plug there and 1600s cutting up the trains and taking water there when they had to. Finally, a train did come along. He noticed a little boy stuck around, a little boy at the right. If somebody knows a rail fan in Greendale, I'd love to get the shot to him if he still lives there. With a Conrail caboose. I think today the station probably is still there, but the bridge is knocked down. And obviously the signal bridge is gone too. Another day I went back up to the cutoff and I waited around hours and hours. Nothing came. So he came away with this shot of the Roosevelt Tunnel. You can see the electric slide fence on the left-hand side there. And when the track was coming up, when the abandonment had happened, I went up to Haynesburg to see what was going on. These guys were running a speeder on the abandoned cutoff, and they actually gave me a ride to Blairstown and back. I don't know why. This is a piece of rail in the yard at Gladstone. Pretty old rail, 1895. And I can only imagine that somehow maybe the Lackawanna bought this rail secondhand, because I think those initials stamp in New York, Lake Erie, and Western. Anyway, this is the Gladstone yard in 1984. Here's a rail bug for you. Okay, now commutation. We were funny. Before the meeting, we were talking about commuting and that it can be a grind. So I did a search on the web. I did a search on the web. I said, whimsical, something I put in a search, whimsical commutation, something like that. And these are some of the things that came up. Look at the upper left here. Being a commuter isn't easy because it might take anywhere from 20 minutes to 2 hours to get home to work. Also, when you think about the word commute can be travel, or it can be something to do with the jail sentence. So there's a lot of connotations in the word that in commutation. People don't think of commutation as a good thing, but I'm here to say I enjoyed it, especially the first 10 years. I commuted on the CNJ from 1975 for 19 years, and then moved to Mountain Lakes and commuted from out of Mountain Lakes for about 15 years. But the first 10 years were interesting, and when I wanted to do a little rail fanning in the Lackawanna, I would commute out of Gillette or maybe Murray Hill, and then generally they would honor my CNJ commutation ticket. I would say, anyway. This picture was taken long before I was commuting. I was still in college here. This is Thanksgiving weekend, 1960, and we see a picture of the Morristown club car in Hoboken on a weekend. Interestingly enough, at the time, there were 4 club cars in service. 2 of them, originally they had 6. 2 were cut off, as I just found out on the EL list. 2 of them had been scrapped before the merger. And I couldn't figure out why I never saw all 6 club cars, but now I finally found out. Anyway, the 2453 was the Morristown car. This was the only car of the 4 in service that didn't stay. The 2 Dover cars stayed in Dover. The Gladstone car stayed overnight in Gladstone, but the Morristown car always came back to Hoboken, or at least it did in the 60s. I don't know why that would be. Maybe it was to do with vandalism, but that's what happened. It would go up on a really early train in the morning, come back on a commuter train, and then at night it would go west and then come back on a local. This is a shot one of my favorite shots. I took this on the way to work before I was driving. This is the train has just come off the Millington High Bridge, and in about 30 seconds it'll be stopping at the Millington Station. Murray Hill shot. And this is a Morristown shot. This is the train 508 with the club car. The car has been freshly painted. This is train 508, a 12-car train. Back in the day, and when I first saw this train around 1960 or 61, this train would come up. Remember I said the club car didn't stay in Morristown. The train would, an 8-car train would come up from Hoboken, and this would be the last car on the train, and they'd have a car of express on it, would be behind the club car. And that train would back the express car down into that express freight house. I don't know what kind of, well, how to phrase that building, but I assume it's some sort of express house, maybe Railway Express. Then the 8-car train would cross over, get the last 4 cars out of the yard, and then proceed east as train 408. So it was a pretty interesting operation, and I certainly wish I had taken pictures of it. Gladstone car, I only include this picture because they called it a subscription car. There were several names floating around for these cars. People called them parlors, they called them club cars. Gladstone people called them subscription cars. There's a publication that came out shortly after the electrification was done, and this publication listed was a review of the entire electrification, and they had the roster of all the trailers, and they called them club trailers. So I'm staying with club trailers, club cars. And notice that they had 6 of them, 5 of one weight and the 2455 of another weight. So when I started, 4 of them were still around. When I started paying close attention. Okay, this is on the Pascack Valley. And the reason I was on the Pascack Valley was I wanted to get some shots of the E8s before the push-pulls came. This is Oradell. Small train just after the rush at Suffern, I guess. Hoboken. And then I wanted to get the E8s on the Port Jervis train. After the Pascack Valley was converted all push-pull, and the last thing left was 2 Port Jervis trains, something that was more to do with the sharing of costs with the state of New York. So here we see the first Port Jervis train pulling in. 2 shots of MUs, club car. And now we see a switcher is attached to the first train to pull the equipment out. But before he does that, the second Port Jervis train comes in. And you can see the train, that second train is still pulling in. And now for some reason, the engines on the second train come out before the engines on the first train to go out to the engine terminal. And now finally the 2 E8s come out. Just seeing these 2 trains, imagine the work before the electrification when all these trains required the trains to be pulled back to the yard. The steam engines had to go back to the yard to be coaled and fueled and turned. Gillette, Millington with the club car. Mawa with a train of Stillwells. And a weekend operated people, all the rail fans. Anyway, the weekend train had also had a single E8. And then when the push pulls came along, this is the way the Stillwell sat for a while. They were going to be used one more time. They were used. This is before. Remember the Ridgewood Railway days? I showed you the steam train shuttling between Ridgewood and Waldwick. I think that was the last use of the Stillwells. This is July 4th, 1976, and there's the day for Operation Sail when all the tall ships came into New York Harbor. The head of the New York Port Authority was raving and ranting about don't drive, it's going to be a catastrophe, everybody drives. And people believed him, and people came out to ride the trains. The problem was they didn't run the trains. So here's a big crowd at Morris Plains where I got on with a friend. And when I got on, the gray car was being used on the front of it. It was a 12-car train. They had no, as far as I know, they had no plans for extras. All they were going to do was run the locals and make them long trains. When I got on, I said, my God, this train is crowded. And by the time we got to Convent, it was standing room only. And at a certain point, the conductor got off and made a phone call and said they had an emergency on their hands. And we went by stations with thousands of people. And I assumed that they called out crews to run extras. The rush hour that evening was phenomenal. They had woken up by the time the evening rush came, and they ran a lot of extras for the evening. But the morning situation was terrible. And this is one picture from Operation Sail. That was quite an interesting day. Bicentennial unit at Hoboken. That was a nice surprise. Beautiful, beautiful paint job. Nice looking unit. See the grass growing between the rails. It was a lot of deferred maintenance. This is 1977. Local at Morristown. Club card. We're going strictly chronologically here. Club car at Gladstone, 3454. This is the train. This is the club car that was on the last run of the absolute last run to Dover on August 24th, 1984. Far Hills. This is a period on weekends. Very frequently, they did not run the electrics because they would do electrical work on the weekends and they would just run the push pulls. So this is between Route 10 and Powder Mill Curve, or between Route 10 and Denville. And this is Powder Mill Curve. Saturday train at Mountain Lakes. This is 1977. So 15 years later, I would move to Mountain Lakes and start commuting. And by the time I got here, the station canopy was gone, and the signal bridge we see on the extreme left was also gone. Newark. Ralph Curcio photo at Millington High Bridge. Now, as I say, to get these shots of the club cars, what I would do is I worked downtown almost all of the 36 years I was in New York, with some exceptions, but I was mostly downtown. What I did was I took long lunch hours, took the train back up to Hoboken, and then got into these cars and got shots. And this was not a great shot because the sun, there was another car up against it and the sunlight wasn't coming in. This is the Morristown car, 2453. Another shot of it. This is another car. This is the 51, I believe. I also did black and white. I went over this several times just with this purpose in mind. Shots. This is also part of my commutation. To get these shots, what I did was I would take the PATH train to Newark to pick up the CNJ. To get these shots, what I did was I got off at Journal Square, walked across, watched the rush hour, and then went on home. Club car at West End. This is Morristown, and this is a Morristown train, and they're asking for permission to cross over and go down over into the yard. And here we see him snaking across, and you see the car with the diamond window. That's the Morristown club car. At this point in time, the car was staying in Morristown overnight. Did not go back. Another train going across to the yard. Hoboken. Even when it was all push-pull, there was still a switcher or two around. And a very friendly engineer. I wrote it. I only know his name because it was written on my slide. P.J. Murray. I never saw or heard from the man again. And the MUs were pretty reliable, but occasionally problems happen. I'm riding the train another day when I commuted in on the MUs, and with the train broke down on the hill between Short Hills and Summit. So another MU came up behind and gave us a shove. Gladstone on a weekend. And for a while they used the RDCs on the Pascack Valley. I don't think that lasted too long. I kind of like the blue stripes. Gillette. I guess I was commuting in from Gillette that day. And I guess I was commuting in from Murray Hill this day. My Christmas card shot, Murray Hill. Hoboken. I never liked these, but in retrospect, it's something different for sure. Murray Hill. And the reality, as much as I liked them, the reality was that the commuters had reason not to like them. They were in pretty bad shape. Shot at Glen Rock for the Erie fans. Whenever it was snowing, I took my camera. So with 2 months to go, it became apparent that it was really going to happen. It had been delayed a long time, but it was very apparent it was going to happen. So for the months of July and August, I brought monthly commutation on out of Chatham, Murray, I guess Murray Hill 1 month and Chatham the other. But I got on at various stations and did my best to photograph as much as I could. Friendly engineer on an MU. I think this was riding the Gladstone line. And I'm actually on a train here. Remember, the MUs actually had windows that opened, and I would always sit by an open window. So here I am sticking my head out at Summit, getting a picture of a train on the middle track. Murray Hill again. The old coal trestle. Now this was a surprise to me. This must have happened sometime before and I wasn't aware of it. This is an old club car that had been converted. 3455 was the highest numbered club car. And here I look up and I see that number. I said, whoa. And this is only a week or two before the MU service was going to be converted. One thing certainly different about this car was the light that was over the doorway. None of the other trailer cars had that. But really, I was a commuter, and I'm not too sure I was paying attention. I may have ridden it before, but this particular time I said, "Whoa!" So I'm not too sure when this happened, but there were 4 cars. There were 4 cars when I started in the '60s, and at least 3 when I at the end of the line, but one of them had been converted to a coach. This is the week before the end. Picture the one track had been converted to I guess that track had been used as a test track for the new 25,000 volt electrics, and also as a storage track during the week, because they could do their testing on the weekend, but during the week they had to go back to the 3000 DC. And I give credit to New Jersey Transit. They sent the old cars out in style. They had a celebration at Maplewood. They honored a few people, including Homer Hill, who had ridden the first ride on the Gladstone line. Again, this is the last week. This is an interesting shot because it shows that the Morristown car was still running, even though it wasn't a Morristown yard had been long shut by this time, but that car was still running near the end. And now we finally make the announcement that we have a hard and fast date on what they're going to do. So Tri-State ran a very nice excursion to commemorate it all. This is a black and white shot. Most of the time I regretted doing black and white, but this one I was happy I did. So this is at the Millington High Bridge. Here's the scene at the Chatham station. Remember, I was commuting out of Chatham. Another engineer, this time the friendly engineer, so I rode up to Dover with this guy. This guy's name, this name was written on the slide, William Hahn, H-A-N-N. This is the last week of operation up in Dover. Now, I'm not too sure how I got this. This was the train order for the last MU train to Dover. And I think they might have Xeroxed all these things and put them on the seats. I'm not too sure. I don't know how I got this, but as I say, they did their best to commemorate the event.
And you, Dan, if I could just jump in, you see who signed that?
Yes, I do. Arthur Erdman.
Artie Erdman, yeah.
Yep. Had you ever seen this before, Rich?
No.
No, okay. So here is the last train at 7:10 p.m. The last train left up for Gladstone. And at 7:30, the last train was pulling out for Dover. And there you see the Gladstone car is heading it up to 3454. And I must say, the train was packed. It wasn't standing room, but a lot of people came out for that last ride. And here we are in Dover, the end of the old MUs. The old MUs seem like they were with me forever, and they were until they weren't. So my cousin George Goodwin went out on the Monday after, and they were did the rush hour with the GP40s holding the old MUs. This is a great magazine that I picked up. This was put out by a magazine put out by General Electric. This issue was November 1931. This issue has every detail you can imagine about the electrification. It was just an amazing piece of reading. Not that you want to know all the details about electrification, which but they had things about rail bonding, the signaling, the catenary system, certain basic facts. There were over almost 1,200 catenary structures that had to be constructed. So it was a tremendous piece of work. The other interesting thing was the motivation. The motivation is that they had for actually doing this in the first place. And one of the big motivations was just congestion in Hoboken Terminal. In the mid-1920s, they went from 12 tracks to 17 tracks. And a couple of years later, they found they were just as congested as ever. So you can imagine the whole business of everything being steam and having to pull the trains out. The engines have to be cold and watered and turned. The electrification made a lot of good sense. Another interesting thing that came out of this was that part of the electrification, they had an agreement with the state of New Jersey to be able to have a modest rise in fares. But as of the publication of this magazine, the state still hadn't followed through. So anyway, just a lot of interesting stuff. They also, technically, the things they did for the cars, some things were simple, some things were not so simple. Here's a diagram of the air ducts that they had. They had the idea that if they had the air ducts to cool the traction motors, if they took the air in from the top, it wouldn't have picked up all the soot as they traveled along. So some very practical considerations in the building of these cars. So the first day of MU operation on the Morris and Essex, I think, was the following Wednesday. I could be right. I think it was the following Wednesday. So yeah, I think they had 2 days of push-pull operation. And then the first day of of the new MUs on the Gladstone line was Labor Day. This is the first train on the Gladstone line with the new MUs, the first revenue train. Okay, we're getting down to the end here. One last section I wanted to hold for the end because it sort of fits in with some of the movies I have, and that is that New Year's Day, Christmas Eve and New Year's Eve were big events at Hoboken because they ran a lot of special trains. People worked half a day, and they wanted to be able to get home. So the railroad tried to accommodate them. And for the Erie, it was a particularly necessary because they had a number of branches that only had a few rush hour trains. For example, think of Essex Fells. There were 2 trains and then plus a shuttle train from Great Notch. The northern branch with maybe 3 trains. So there was no daytime service on some of those lines, on many of the Erie lines. So I happened to get a hold of the plan that they had. And this was like on the Erie side, it was like a 6-page document, amazingly detailed. So to look at just what they would look at the first line here, 1 p.m. extra at Essex Fells, third line down, 2:30 extra at Essex Fells. Further on down, we see trains are annulled. Now, I assume that 1 or 2 of those trains are trains that would have gone to Essex Fells later in the day. But it was the middle of the day, Christmas Eve and New Year's Eve, Hoboken was hopping. So here's a Lackawanna extra going out. The Lackawanna trains showed the white flags. This is the 1960 version of this whole thing. There were always switch engines buzzing around, of course. There's a renumbered Lackawanna switcher. This is all Christmas Eve 1960. Yard scene from Bobby Duthie. So now we're at Christmas Eve 1963, and what I want to say now is that what I took in black and white here is going to show up on Bobby Duthie's movies, which I'm going to show as soon as we're done here in just a minute or two. So here's a PA. This PA has come up out of the Erie coach yard, and he's that new connection was built and backing down into the station. Here are two trains side by side, leaving midday, two Erie trains. And here's a Boonton line extra. And this particular train, when you see the movie, it will have the Mountain Lake subscription car on the end. And in the middle of all this, they ran a freight train with train masters and 70 cars. So there's my measured. Sit tight. We're going to show some movies. So I'm also going to just briefly. The come on for this show was that I was also going to do some of the sound that I took in the Denville Tower. In the early 60s, out of the blue, my parents got me a tape recorder. Well, what do you do with the tape recorder? Well, you take it to the tower. So what we're going to listen to here is there's two things we're going to listen to. Anybody who wants these sound recordings, I can give you a link to them. They're actually online. If you send me an email and you want to go through these sound recordings for some reason, you're welcome to. You can download them. You can do whatever you want. So there was a lot of noise in the tower that didn't relate to trains. There were buzzers going off. There was the block line was open. You'd hear the other towermen shouting. So, and something else that was interesting was this. This just takes a minute. I'll stop it for a minute. So what you're hearing two things here. Number one, you hear pumps in the background, and those are from the Denville Tower pumping up the switch lines. I think those switches at Denville were electromagnetic that depended on air pressure. So the pumps would run quite frequently. And it was also I think it was proper etiquette for a towerman. Before you left for the night, if you were second trick towerman, you would go down and stoke up the furnace for the next guy to come on duty, which was around 11:30. So we just have 50 seconds of stoking up a coal furnace. So now we're going to just the towerman would report the trains in. I was never quite sure who they reported them to, whether it was an assistant dispatcher or who it was. But with the open block line, you could hear the Dover towerman do his reporting, and it's just interesting to hear this. So here I've listed here the trains that he will report. Okay, what was interesting to me there is that, whoops, I want to stop that. What was interesting to me there is that all the trains that originated and terminated there, he listed the crews. He also listed the numbers of the MU cars on the MUs. It's kind of interesting. So I'm wondering if I don't know. Did the crews at Dover report to the Towerman when they at the end of a run? I don't know. Okay, now just some movies. I promised movies, and we're going to get movies. Okay, what I want to do is these are movies taken by Bobby Duthie. Okay, remember he was a teenager when he took these, but the subject matter is hopefully the subject matter is what counts here. So first we're going to have a look at a ride on a ferry, and it's a little confusing because he may have spliced some of the 50-foot rolls in the wrong order, but nevertheless. So we're going to go now. Whoops. So we're at Hoboken. Wait a second here. I'm sorry, I want to start at a different spot. Otherwise, I'll be confused. Okay, so we're on the ferry going to Hoboken. The reason I say that these things are spliced wrong is because first we saw the Empire State Building, now we're seeing the Lower Manhattan. I'll just stop this for 1 second. This was of interest to me because this building right in the center with sort of the rounded dome, there's another building just behind it to the right. That was the Singer Building. And for a short period of time, that was the tallest building in the world, believe it or not. It came down in the 70s for a modern place, but anyway, just to see move, and to the left we see a building that was the tallest building, the Woolworth Building. That was the tallest building for at least 15 years. Anyway, seeing the Singer Building was an impractical building. The base of the building covered the block, but the tower only covered a small portion of the block. Okay, now we're looking at the Christmas rush. Notice this, Phoebe Snow Diner in an Erie car and a Stillwell. I'm sorry, this is not the Christmas rush. This is just an ordinary rush hour, ordinary operations. Former Lackawanna 970. Okay, now. Up to time 4:09. Oops. Go. Okay, this is the day of the Christmas rush, 1963. It's either New Year's Eve or Christmas Eve, I'm not sure. And now we're looking at trains coming out of the Old Erie Coach Yard, backing, and they're going to back up to the into the terminal. This part's a little tedious. This is where the light rail is now. So here's a train with a PA backing in. And that's the train I had a black and white of, snapshot. Now we're going to see a coal train with B&O power and a CNJ caboose. And there's a train of Stillwells backing up into the terminal. So this train will go forward, come to a halt, and then back up the connection. Boonton Line train. Check out the last car, Mountain Lake subscription car.
Yeah. I had not that long ago, to be honest.
White flags coming east. Okay, so we can stop that. Okay. Now, okay, this one is kind of mind-boggling. 195. Whoops. Playback. Jump to time. This is a Taylor Extra. And my feeling, having watched this, God, I wish I could go back and be on the platform to see that again. Whoops. I think he has it on a tripod, and the tripod's jumping up and down. He had the idea to put the camera down in the tracks and let the Phoebe snow pass over. So I'm just going to let this go. Well, there's something after it. So this was not he didn't have the camera angled right, but watch, just watch. And that's what teenagers do. Branchville Milk Train. Number 5, late afternoon train going west. One more freight in the dying light of day. West End. Phoebe Snow, I think. Yep. Okay, two more quick, 3-minute videos and then we're done. Okay, so these are pictures, believe it or not, these are movies I took on my way to work. I always wanted to get the MUs in the snow, and I did it on 2 occasions. So here's one. Let's make this stop. Whoops, stop. Shoot, sorry. Whoops. So I'm gonna do 5. This is 1982. Very late winter storm, April 6th, 1982. One more. This is the last one. Okay. And that's it. That is it.
All right, Dan, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
That was a really covered a lot of ground there and some interesting stuff.
That's one way to say it, yeah.
There's just a handful of messages here. Can you see the chat or you want me to read them to you?
Read them to me.
Okay. From me, why Denville? Did you move there from Brooklyn?
Well, my parents had a summer house in Parsippany, and believe it or not, Parsippany used to be a summer community. They were the last holdouts as summer residents. So when we went there in the summertime, I remember my epiphany. I was looking at an Erie Lackawanna timetable, and I saw that two lines came together at Denville. So one day I set off on my bike and found it. And then later on, I met the Towerman, and where else? There was really no better place.
Agreed. Bob Mitchell asked, and I believe this is based on that very old photo taken just after the electrification. What are the two buildings next to the Denville station?
I don't know what they are. They were gone by the time I came along.
Okay. Jeff Gabriel, did the Denville Tower have exterior train order signals? the operator walk over the M&E tracks often to hoop up orders?
No, not at all. I only saw, and all the time I was there, and I was there a lot, I only saw him hoop up an order once on the Booton side.
But I believe lights were added after Conrail to signify that there were train orders. Because
Okay.
they're still there on the tower now. But
Okay.
I'm pretty sure that was a post-Conrail thing.
Yeah, it just did not happen when I was there.
You had a shot of the P-Burger coming around the curve by the station, and there were automobiles parked on the track 2 side in that curve, which surprised me because that's kind of a swampy area back there.
Yeah,
Is that common to have cars parked there?
I don't think so. I have to scratch my head about that one, but I don't think so. I don't think the parking lot was that full that anybody needed to do that.
Right. John Barth was on the 1961 fan trip that you talked about, and he said that George Felter wrote the trip notes for that trip.
Okay.
I just mentioned about Chester Junction versus Lake Junction. They're often used interchangeably, but they are two separate locations, right? Chester Junction is on
Right.
the Lackawanna, and Lake Junction is where the Hoboken branch, like a Hoboken branch of the CNJ, crosses the Chester branch.
Right.
Great show. Thanks. A couple people have to get up early, so they've dropped off. Somebody's looking for your email address.
dan.mcfadden@gmail.com. I can even, hold on, just one more second here, I'll put it back up.
I'm going to type it into the chat too, in case that gets
There it is.
saved.
Can you, is everybody still seeing my screen?
Yep.
Okay, there it is.
And several people thanking you for a great show. Comment about ice and snow on the MUs would make a significant modeling challenge. Yeah, that's for sure.
Yeah. And that was done on my way to work.
So yeah, and you talked a little bit about the 1984 changeover electrification. That's a time that's interesting to me as well. And you and I can have a conversation about that offline.
Yep.
I've been trying to document the actual when was the first train and last train, and not the last train, but the first of the new trains. So we'll get together about that.
Yes.
Does anybody else have any other comments or questions? Oh, here's one. Hang on a second. In your second movie, you had a shot of a New York Central unit with a Lackawanna coach. Was that on the New Jersey Junction?
A New York Central unit.
I think that was a model.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, there were some model film. Yes, I agree.
Yeah. Remember, we're talking about a guy who was 16 years old. And when he spliced his films together, we had family celebrations next to rail, but I'm glad to have them anyway.
So,
Rich, can I ask a question out loud?
absolutely.
Okay. Dan, I'm interested in the subscription cars a little bit. And like you said, the Mountain Lake subscription car.
Yep.
But that actually went to Washington.
Yes.
So my question is, did those subscription cars, did all the people only go to one station, or did they go to a range of stations?
Well, it was known as the Mountain. It actually had a sign in the window that said Mountain Lake subscription car. Now, I think it was a Mountain Lakes deal. And in fact, the train it was on was first stop Boonton.
Okay.
So it was interesting. The two premier trains. I mean, there were the two premier commuter trains, if there's such a thing. There was one on the Lackawanna side. It was a 13-car MU that first stopped Chatham, the train 639. It left at 5:30, and the Lakeland Express, which went to Washington on the Boonton line, also left at 5:30. and that was the Lakeland Express. It's carried the drumhead sign, which I had pictures of, and so as I say, they both left at 5:30. The Lakeland Express generally made it to the demo station about 5 minutes ahead of the MU, because he only had the one stop or two stops. Yeah, I think it was Mountain Lakes, and in fact, on the Mountain Lakes website, there's some information about people riding that subscription. I'll try and look it up.
Well, let me throw the other one at you, Morristown. Okay, did they have passengers that got off at Madison or Chatham
Yes.
or something?
Yes.
So there were a little bit of multiple stations on.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Yeah, I think. I think you could. A funny thing happened when I decided the last 2 months I was going to ride on the Marston Essex. I wrote to New Jersey Transit and said I want to subscribe to the club car, and they lost my message, and they found it when it was too late. But anyway.
Sure, and they had a steward or a bartender or something.
I think
there?
the one from Gladstone did. I don't know that the others did.
Okay, thank you.
Dan, during your talk, you made a comment that you wondered a bit about why the Fairbanks Marsh train masters were used in commuter service.
Yep.
I seem to remember statements that they were particularly good at acceleration,
Right.
that made them therefore very handy for commuter services. And I note that 3 railroads that I can think of quickly used them in local passenger service: Lackawanna, Jersey Central, and Southern Pacific.
Yes. All I can say is the Lackawanna was pretty generous using them there because they had a lot of needs.
I think they ordered them for that.
Yeah. They had the steam boilers. The first 10 had the steam
yeah.
boilers. So yes.
Well, it's 10 p.m. I don't want to take this on too long, but if there's any other questions or comments, we can handle 1 or 2 more.
Hi, Mr. McFadden. Just wanted to quickly comment on your night shots of the Denville station. I feel like you sort of captured the slumbering soul of the railroad in those 2 shots, and it was, as someone who wasn't alive, unfortunately, when the Erie Lackawanna was alive, those meant a lot to me, and I really appreciate your entire show. Stunning, stunning, stunning pictures. Thank you for sharing.
Send me an email and I'll shoot them to you.
Thank you very much. I will do that.
Yep.
And I just want to say thank you. That was a very good presentation and I enjoyed it.
Thank you. I felt like I was all over the place, but I had to go with the material I have.
Oh, it's wonderful.
And I'm going to say thank you too.
You're welcome.
Yeah, Dan, and on behalf of the officers of the Erie Lackawanna Historical Society, we want to thank you for taking the time to do this and everything. And I know, it wasn't quite what you presented to the tri-state, and that's what makes it unique. And I'm glad that everyone was able to join, and it was a really great show. Thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome. I'll say one more thing. When the Zoom presentations came along, I said, "Oh, that's too bad. It's nice to go to a rail society and meet people and chat." But as far as showing old movies, you can't show old 8mm movies in an auditorium. They just don't hold. You just don't project well enough. But once you digitize them, I mean, they project pretty well on a Zoom session, I think. And there's got to be loads of people with old 8mm film.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yep.
Very good. Well, thank you all for joining. And Dan, a big thank you for your time you took to put this together and to share it with us. And
you're very welcome.
Hope to see you all at whenever the next one of these gets scheduled. Have a good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night, everybody.